Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott C., and huffing and puffing away with me this evening, the kinder, gentler version of Mr. Drummond, it's Brian H. Hey, Brian.
Hey, are you ready to take a trip up the coast, Scott C.? We got some business.
Well, I bet we do, because we are back. We are back to talk about the 8th episode of Severance Season 2, Sweet Vitriol. By the way, does anyone actually use the phrase sweet vitriol in the episode? Because I didn't catch its use this time, but I might have just missed it. Did they? They didn't say it, did they?
I didn't catch it.
Okay.
I didn't catch it if it happened, but I think it's a very meta name for this episode.
Oh my God, is it? Oh
because
my God,
boy, did this episode catch some sweet vitriol, Scott.
It's almost as if they planned it that way.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder.
Well, it is an episode that, once again, it breaks the prototypical Severance format, though, as we are intimating right now, perhaps to a less successful degree than, say, Woe's Hollow or Chikai Bardot episodes. Even more so than the Chikai Bardot episode from last week, which focused on Gemma, but still had plenty of appearances from other important Severance players like Mark, Devin, Milchick, and so on. This episode, it's completely a Harmony Cobell vehicle, save for the few seconds of hearing the voices of Devin and then Mark at the very end. But no one else from the main or supporting cast appears. Now, first and foremost, one would say it's kind of an odd placement for such an episode. Whereas the Gemma episode, that one really works to fill in so many questions and resolve a bunch of theories. And it, in fact, actually really raises the stakes for the series because it becomes more and more clear this is a life or death consequence situation with victims and monsters and so on. This episode, hey, a former member of the Monster Squad herself, Harmony, okay, perhaps she's made a bit more human by filling out her backstory that seems filled with things ranging from childhood indoctrination, child labor, possible brainwashing, and the horrible consequences that befall both her family and the entire town, which actually becomes a tragic character in of itself. I mean, you'd think this town of Salt's Neck was located in North Korea. But, look, I don't know that either of us are going to call this a bad episode. I feel, and we haven't spoken before we've recorded, at least not anything outside of vagaries, but at least for me, I'll say, it certainly feels like a letdown considering what had preceded it, especially when you're aware that there's really not that much time left in the season. And I think that's one of the biggest issues overall.
I think the disappointment with this episode is not so much on the content, it's on a lack of other content and the context during the season in which the episode appeared.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true. It does call to mind something else we've spoken about over the past year, and maybe I'll bring that up later in the podcast. It's something that me and you talked about on this very podcast in one of our more celebrated podcasts. So if you haven't figured out what I'm talking about yet, you probably should have figured out from that little comment. Okay? And by the way, listeners, if we have time, and I believe we will be spending some time talking a bit about another series, another specific episode on this podcast, where there may be a somewhat, again, I cannot speak for Brian, we haven't talked about it as of yet, but there, at least for myself, there may be at least a somewhat similar sentiment. Ooh, look at all those S's for the guy with the lisp. to be uttered about that episode, because there was a certain level of disappointment, especially considering where it was in the season and so on. That one might be a bit more content related than this one would be, I would say.
I would agree. And I'll just add for context right before we started the podcast, I checked IMDb for the latest up to the minute rating of this episode. And it is by far the worst rated episode of this season and probably the worst rated episode of the entire series. The IMDb rating, just as of a few minutes ago, was 6.7.
Wow. Okay. This is a series that generally gets in the 8 point whatevers. We've had a couple nine pluses this season. And I think even an average episode, I can't recall, but probably at least is in the high sevens. So that would be a low thing. Not that either of us wants to put that much stock in IMDb ratings, but it's not a bad bellwether overall, especially when you're dealing with a series or a franchise that hasn't been beleaguered by factions of obnoxious fans the way a lot of other things have. Like, I wouldn't trust those ratings if this was like a Marvel or DC Comics related thing, or a Game of Thrones or Star Wars or Star Trek, because there's people who kind of bomb those things. I don't think that's the case for something like Severance, so it might be a more honest reaction to it.
Well, it's a good thing to check to see if the bubble you're in on social media is reflecting a broader opinion.
Yes,
that's why I checked
absolutely.
it, because I think you and I both in the bubble we're in have seen a lot of negative reaction. So I was curious what the reaction was, and it seems to be everybody more down.
Yeah. And I think as we speak about the episode, I mean, we're going to approach the episode about its content as we go through it from beginning to end. We may opine a bit about it as we go on. Whether we address any comments that we've come across ourselves or not during the course of the podcast remains to be seen. So it's funny you mentioned coastline when we opened up the conversation here. So when Sweet Vitriol opens and we get the coastline and a seascape, which looked to me much like the ocean, I'll tell you something. I'm so silly. I actually had the thought. I went, wait, the water is on the left side of the screen. So, therefore, ergo, this must be the West Coast, even though it doesn't really look like the West Coast at all. And of course, it was actually filmed in Newfoundland, Canada, and it takes place in the fictional town of Salt's Neck, which is a place where we kind of get the impression it isn't that far from the Kier town that we spent most of our time in. And the impression we've gotten about this Kier town kind of place, that's a bit more East Coasty than anything. It's more closer to Michigan than it would be anywhere else. But I do believe that's supposed to be more of an oceanscape. So I'm thinking it's got to be more East Coast than West Coast, regardless of what side the water is on.
Well, I think there's a good clue that it's ocean side, because you see the beautiful shot of the harbor and there's ice on one side, and the other side there is no ice. And that typically is where a river meets the sea, because the sea won't freeze for a while because of its size and the salt content, but the fresh water will.
Right. That makes perfect sense to someone who knows nothing of such matters. So, as I said, the town itself, it's almost a character. I would say it's even a few live bodies short of being a ghost town. It's a town where the Lumen ether mill, I'm not clear if it's the ether mill that's spoken of in the legends of Kier or not, or maybe that's an ether mill like that may exist in any number of other towns that have had such factories. And it was the product of the factory purely. They just produced ether. You kind of wonder, what the fuck is Lumen doing with so much ether production? It's kind of a curious product to be responsible for. But back to the town itself, it does appear that this was a town that had its resources sucked dry by Lumen and left for nearly dead. And by resources, I don't just merely mean, the ether, as apparently most of who's left in town, they look like they're either addicted to the stuff, be it huffing it like people do with paint in a bag, or applying it to a rag, chloroform style. The resources I'm really thinking of are the people. We hear talk throughout the episode of child labor, and that's how we start to piece together the past of Harmony, and how I guess you might say she was among the jewels that were mined and refined for Lumen, working in the factory, going to the Egan school, being apparently personally selected by Jamie Egan himself, being a Wintertide Fellowship winner, as we learned towards the end of the episode.
I was just going to jump in and say I think something that is maybe a cue for when this town was great is the song playing when she enters is a song called Who Knows by a little known R&B singer named Marion Black. And this song was released in 1970. Marion Black was from Columbus, Ohio, and never really had any big hits, never really was, that famous. It's kind of an obscure song. But I think the cue of that as she enters town and that song playing would place the time maybe of when this town was bustling would have been in maybe around in the 70s. So if we're looking at the musical cues in this episode, and I've got a couple of more things to say about the music later, but just thought I'd let the fans know that the time frame of that song is 1970.
All one has to really try to determine are the ages of the characters we're dealing with. Whether it be Harmony, whether it be the person that we don't learn until the very end of the episode. His name is Hampton, and we try to figure out, well, how old are they now? And then we start to peel back the clock as far as when they might have been, because they were working alongside each other in the factory, apparently, or whatever. So if it's at least 30 years ago, and they've already established, people behind the show have said this is taking place essentially now. So right. That would be, I guess the 90s, but the town had probably been thriving. The thriving of the town probably wasn't only a brief period, probably had been doing that for a number of decades. So the 70s makes perfect sense that it would have been bustling through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and probably hit a certain, whatever, probably, I would say sometime probably this century. And that's where, and you're dealing with the after effects now.
Right.
Because, based on how weather beaten it looks, the factory's obviously closed down, and the remaining people, they were either taken or they were ravaged by addiction, or they're suffering from health issues, most likely connected to the ether production. Because I guess one can imagine, the fumes and the runoff and so on were probably at least somewhat toxic.
Yeah, it's definitely a commentary about environmental and societal breakdown due to Lumen.
Right.
And it was very reminiscent, I think, of the opioid crisis in northeastern part of the United States. And there's some great documentaries from that time. I think one's called Cape Cod, USA. I may be wrong, but I think it's on HBO. But I'm going to give a little bit of flowers to the show for this part as we establish this town. I mean, you couldn't pick a shittier looking place to film, and for them just showing this in its ruggedness and its dilapidated condition, I think it set a tone to tell you the town, was obviously in decline. And I thought it's not the kind of exterior and location that you typically see in a show. And it's not the clean, bright white, we've seen in this show with clean lines and straight lines, and the houses even are crooked. The paint's peeling, the shingles are coming off. So I thought the set of this, on location place was quite striking to begin, and the way she weaved through the town on the car, I liked that part as we began the episode.
We talked last week about things being a slight shock to the system when it's something you're not accustomed to seeing on a show like this. And the level of exterior shots and when what we're seeing is something that we're not used to seeing. Oh, right. We were talking about the opening shot in last week's episode. That was it. Now I remember. And everything we see in this episode is so far from the norm of what we've become accustomed to. It kind of breaks us a little bit. Again, I'm not excusing it, but I don't think that wouldn't be one of the things I point to as a flaw in the episode. I have to say the talk of child labor, which is brought back as we're peeling back the backstory of Harmony. the moment that's mentioned, and then much more so later on when we learn more about her specific history and her schooling and the award she won, you can't help but think of Miss Huang. And you
Yep.
realize how she's being groomed at such a young age. And you start to think or start to wonder, is she following a very similar career and life path that Harmony Cobell had? They, being 30 something years later, maybe there isn't the child labor situation as far as working in factories anymore. But it sounds like they're still starting them really young at Lumen.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get another nice musical cue that I almost think's an inside joke by the creators that as they're getting ready to head to the factory, we hear Charles Bradley's "Where Do We Go From Here?"
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with Charles Bradley's work, he has several albums out, excellent. But it's almost like an inside joke. And from there, they head to Sissies. And I think we ought to just pause and say we have James LaGrosse or James LaGros. I don't know how you say it, as this Hampton character.
Right.
And another good part of the episode is what little bit we see of him. I kind of wanted to see more.
I love the tenor of the meetup between Harmony and Hampton. And by the way, as I said, we don't learn his name till the end of the episode, which is kind of strange. If you watch closed captioning, they keep referring to him as the waiter until the end of the episode. But you kind of get a sense of the history between them. Yes, there's animosity, but you can also tell he has a weakness for her. She refers to them being chums and colleagues, but you can already guess there's probably something more here. You wonder, could he have been her first kiss? Could he have actually maybe even been her first sexual experience? You know, there's more going on there than that.
Yeah, and as they head towards the house, he's full aware too of what Lumen's capable of. Here's somebody on the outside that we've not seen really in the world. We haven't seen somebody on the outside of Lumen that's aware of the evilness and what they're capable of, and he understands that they could be watching her. He hides her in the truck. She's known in the town, and he knows that's not great. But it's interesting that then we learn not only is she known and maybe not liked, but there's somebody else in this town that's called a pariah. And that's where they're headed, and that's to Sissy's house.
But you love the fact that Hampton has no love for this woman, Sissy, when he somewhat jokingly says, "Tell her drop dead for me."
Yeah, yeah. That's why the little flourishes of him. Yeah, that's why I wanted to see more of him. But this house, I mean, has like almost a 1970s horror film vibe, out alone on this coast. And we do see in one scene. I don't know if you caught this, but I watched the episode twice. We do see in one of the scenes in this part of the show, we do see a lighthouse. So,
oh yeah, you know what this kind of reminded me of a little bit, not a lot, and not specifically, certainly not the interiors, but not specifically that, but more when you see them approaching your house and just the general look of things, and perhaps a bit more desolate looking, which is one of the points they're trying to hammer home here. But it reminds me of movies I've watched that take place maybe in a place like, I don't know, like Ireland or something like that, where like that film, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce part of it. So
Sheeran.
Thank you. Wow, look at you. You knew exactly where I was going. I was going to say, the one with Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson with the cutting off of the fingers and everything. But it's just the way those houses look kind of by themselves, and there's something slightly askew about them. Like they look like, a good wind could blow them over kind of a thing, and look like they've been standing for the last 300 years or something. That's what a lot of the places, and especially Sissy's house, looks like here, I thought.
Well, it looks like the whole town and all these houses are in a battle against nature.
Yeah. Or even to the degree where it's like, this is what a town looks like that had gone through a disaster years ago, like a town that had a hurricane hit it and it never quite recovered, and they never had the resources to rebuild. And in a way, you could say, well, that's kind of what the impact Lumen had on it. Lumen was the disaster that hit this town. It was man-made, not God-made or cure-made. Anyway, I really love the way my voice sounds tonight. Fuck this podcast. So at the house, Harmony, she's searching for something, but it's here we find out far more about her past. We find out from her conversations with a heretic like aunt, who is clearly a true blue cure acolyte through and through, as well as details that we will spot in the rooms or even certain darkly dug sheds or basements or whatever the hell you call that thing that's outside the house. I'm still not clear what you call it.
We call that a root cellar.
Oh, is that what that is? Okay. Yeah, we don't have a lot of those in Brooklyn, New York here, so I wouldn't be familiar with them. Now, we have already picked up on her past a bit as far as her working in the factory, but it's through her conversation with her aunt that we find out how she was on Kier's radar and how they had a major connection. Now, beyond how she excelled at school and getting that, as we find out later, that winter, was it Wintertide? Wintertide, right?
Yep,
Wintertide Fellowship. But between her scholastic experiences, being under the, I'm going to reference another TV show, being under the watchful eye of her religiously obsessive aunt, and then being handpicked and having a direct connection with Jamie Egan, who is essentially, let's face it, leader of a cult, it's kind of becomes easier to understand how Harmony fell under such a thrall.
Well, you have to think, it's quite a burden to tell a kid that basically I see God in you. And that's what her aunt tells her, is that Jamie Egan had seen Kier in her. And she was so promising that they gave her this prestigious fellowship, and even urges her to return and beg forgiveness, that if she does that, that perhaps she can rejoin Lumen. And we realize then that perhaps it wasn't her mother or it wasn't someone else, that it was maybe this aunt and Jamie Egan who pushed her this way her life. And her great regret is her mother, because we also find out in this portion of the episode that weird feeding tube that we didn't know why it was on her shrine. She has carried it with her on this trip. We saw it in the car earlier this season, and now we know why. But here we learn a really interesting fact about this family, that Harmony's mother didn't accept the religion. She did not accept the Kier religion. Her aunt was clearly a big time follower, because she was wearing the white dress. And if you remember, I think she said it last season or sometime before, she'd referred to her mom as either an atheist or a Catholic or maybe both, but she was not a follower of Kier. And
Right.
that's kind of a big deal, to not share a religion as engrossing as this would be. So that was an interesting detail about her past we learned.
It's curious to me that the level of negativity that Sissy is expressing towards Harmony. Now, one can say it's due to whatever Mr. Drummond said to her when he clearly has called her recently. So then you kind of wonder, if Harmony shows up a month earlier, would her aunt's treatment of her be any different? But a lot of the animosity seems to be ground in for more than just a call she would have gotten recently. You know, yes, Mr. Drummond has most likely made Harmony out to be something of a traitor, which, as you say, is why, Sissy is telling her that she can go back and plead forgiveness. But it seems like the issues go far beyond that, which I found interesting only because Sissy is such a believer, and up until maybe even this very episode, if not shortly beforehand, I would think that that's how we were regarding Harmony as well. So you kind of wonder, well, what's the disconnect here? And so that's still something which is kind of hazy to me, if I may put it that way.
It leaves us questioning the motives of Harmony and what ultimately she'll do. But the real problem between these two women is not the relationship; it's the death of one's sister and the other's mother,
right?
And how she died, and sort of the turning point. The big deal is, did she die because the feeding tube was removed? or did she die because she pulled it out herself and thereby committed suicide, which may have implications on the afterlife, etc. Um, and a thought I had in that moment is, maybe Harmony's mad because if this severance thing is working towards some sort of preservation, it didn't give her the opportunity to perhaps give her mother something to assist her or to ease her suffering or to maybe preserve her in a chip if it goes that way. I'm not saying it will, and my guess is it probably won't. But that's the real basis of the problem between these women is not the religion. It's the problem with their shared sibling and mother.
So it's curious that Sissy has it locked off in such a way. This is not a room filled with tons of memories, as far as we see.
Right, but it is curious she left the machine there.
She left the machine there. I was curious about what's hanging in the closet. The clothing that's hanging in the closet, which is raggedy and torn. And I think maybe even at this point in the episode, I wasn't even super clear. We were talking about Harmony's mother at this point. I was still a little confused until it suddenly clicked who it was. And at this point, I was even thinking, wait, is this a mother or a grandmother or a sister or whatever? And you see these clothes in the closet, and you start thinking, oh, are these the clothes that someone might have worn when they were working at that factory, and that's why they look that way? And was that we know they had child labor at the factory. Were adults working there too? Was her mother working there too? And is that why she has the breathing issues that eventually led to her death? Is it from working in the factory and exposure there? It's hard not to think of it that way. And to a certain degree, that might be something, even though Harmony went to work for Lumen, she might also hold them accountable or to blame as well. And maybe Sissy is in some form of denial about that, so she locks it away. There's a lot going on in this episode as far as the Cobell family is concerned. And ultimately, especially when we get to the big reveal towards the end of the episode, there's a lot of faith versus science kind of things, and the truth inconveniently gets in the way of someone's belief system a lot of times, or not a lot of times, but in this episode.
Well, I think we do learn as she enters her mother's room. There's a plaque in the hall that says "Youth Apprentice Matron," and that is for Celestine Sissy Cobell. And so I think the implication of those words is that Sissy was probably supervising the kids stirring vats of ether. And I think the probably what triggers this for Harmony is there are a lot of sacrifices made, but it seems okay to make those sacrifices when they're worth it, or where they're leading to something. But then when she's fired and treated like trash, she feels like all those sacrifices maybe don't feel like they were worth it, that maybe Kier didn't live up to her idea of what Kier was.
When she goes in the room, I think it happens when she finally lies down on the bed. I don't know. I don't think she's sucking on the breathing tube out of yet. Just a question. Harmony is singing something to herself, humming, singing, whatever. Is it the Cure song she's singing, or is it something else entirely? Did you catch that by any chance?
I caught it, and my sense was it was the Cure song.
Okay, that's what I thought it was too, because we've seen her sing that before. Yeah, and I think they even had a shot of her singing it in the previously on at the opening, so that might have been a callback to that, or whatever. Okay, so we have this interesting moment where she lies down on the bed, and we see we again do the passage of time situation where we see how the light changes through the window, as day becomes dusk, becomes evening, and so on. I'll admit, the shot does change at one point, so I was a little thrown for a moment. We get that overhead shot of ice, because for a moment I was trying to figure out how big these masses of ice were. Are we talking icebergs or the ice floes, or something on a smaller scale? Then we switch to another shot of the ocean again. It's just kind of a transition kind of a thing, whatever. And then when we come back, we overhear what's likely, and we discover it's Hampton. Then you realize, oh my God, this dude's been waiting outside, probably twiddling his thumbs or sniffing his rag for the last several hours. Clearly, we can overhear that he's barged in. He's arguing with Sissy and makes his way upstairs to Harmony, where the two of them, they eventually share, well, you know what? They share a little ether and a little kiss.
They do. They do. And he has maybe my favorite line of the episode. That it's in contention with his final line. He has a couple of bangers, but he tells her in a real comforting way that he liked her mother because she hated Lumen more than I did. And I thought that was a great line. It tells you that there was a future for maybe him and her that he has hung on to. It's why he still cares about her. For him to comfort her in that way, to let her know that he liked her mom.
Right. Yeah. So it's a nice moment they share together. And again, I think this scene also kind of confirms the thoughts I was having earlier in the episode. Like, okay, there's certainly been something more between these two. And this is kind of a remember when kind of a moment I felt, both between the sharing of the ether and and the little kissy kiss thought that occurs to Harmony, and then still on a search for whatever it is she's searching for. We still don't know what it is as of yet. And she goes to that thing that, what did you call it again outside?
The root cellar.
The root cellar. Root cellar. Got it.
Before we go there real quick, I want to add something.
Go ahead.
He says something that's sort of a minor line, but I think is important in the context of this show. When he runs in the room, he says, "I had to know." And it's almost like he had to know that she really wasn't being held there, that she was gone or dead, which I think probably means people that live around Lumen know not to be real careful about what's happening when people pass, that there can be, chicanery with that. And I thought that was an interesting throwaway line that could have been, that means something significant in this world.
Huh. I hadn't thought of that. You're so smart, Brian. Nothing into the root cellar. I'm more listening to my voice than anything else right now. And when we're in the root cellar, we come across what's clearly supposed to be some sort of a high school yearbook. It's titled Annual Reminiscences. This is where we see a reference to the Wintertide Fellowship. That's what probably kickstarts a lot of our memories about what Milchick said to Miss Huang. But more importantly, we learn that she stashed something in a bust of Jamie Egan, which was some form of an award that she had gotten for that Wintertide Fellowship. And we see when she confronts her Aunt Sissy later. That's when we learn what this booklet, this document, whatever it is, what we learn. And what we learn is proof, definitive proof, that Harmony Cobell was the person behind so much of what constitutes the concept and procedures of severance. And we hear her bellowing things about the overtime contingency and the Glasgow block and so on and so forth. And I think what's kind of surprising beyond that reveal in of itself, just in the context of the episode, is that her Aunt Sissy believes her. That despite the fact she professes herself to be a woman of faith, she also clearly knows the lies that exist within that faith and can be aware of them and still try to push them aside, which makes me think of the way people are about certain religions, that we have nowadays, like Catholicism and so on.
I want to point out a sort of hilarious thing and a serious thing. They do establish Harmony's bona fides in this. In the yearbook, she is the valedictorian of her class, so she's obviously very impressive and smart. But did you catch what the name of her school was, what their mascot was?
No.
The Fighting Kids. That's the name of it. Yeah, like her high school, the Fighting Kids. But there's a great line that Hampton says to her right before they go out that I forgot to mention earlier. and he says to her, and it's another one of these meta lines. He has so few lines, but they're so good. He said, "I don't think it's here what you're looking for," um, which is, both meta and hitting it. But this reveal that she is responsible for all this then sets this thing into motion, where we have Sissy finally telling her something that really is, I think, a good bit of writing. It's an inversion of what's been happening, and we find out that Sissy had been really being nice to her and telling her she'd pulled her tube out in her mind, but now tells her that she committed suicide, basically. Um, so even though Sissy's terrible in the confines of their faith before, which now she thinks Harmony is breaching, I guess to hurt her, she says, your mom actually committed suicide, that it wasn't me. And she was full of malice and resentment like you.
So the real, the secrets, and she believes it. She clearly believes it. And she questions why he hadn't brought it up. And Harmony does point out that if she had sought credit, she would have been banished. And it's moments later, the aunt tries to throw the papers in the fire, tries, lest it expose the fraud and, the theft of ideas, which would bring down Lumen. It's faith versus science once again. All this casts everything in a different light.
It does.
And it does at least give far, far more weight and credence to why Harmony Cobell clearly believed herself to be far more important to Lumen than the way that they and Helena, if we recall those earlier episodes this season, were treating her. Now we understand it wasn't purely vanity and running the severed floor before, that it was all of this is on top of all that. And maybe she had a point about the way she's being treated.
Right. And now it's quickly moved into motion where we hear somebody's coming, and, God bless Hampton. He just gives her his truck. I mean, I think that tells you he knows how bad these people are and what can happen to her, and he cares about her. And as she's driving off, he that says, come and try to balance my tempers.
Yeah, I love that. I love that little bit there.
Whatever his line is, it's just great to see somebody in the outside world know these people, loathe them, and know exactly what they are.
The only thing the scene was missing is he needed to have a shotgun in his hand, but he said that. I thought that was coming next. And it's when she's driving off, she gets a call. And let's be clear, because we haven't mentioned it before, it's the third time she gets a call from Devon. Now, before I get into this call, it did make me think, because we see she gets a call when she's first coming into town, which she ignores. Then later on, when she's hiding in the back of the truck, and obviously a little bit of time has passed between those two calls. And now this. And we know a lot of time has passed because we saw the passage of time through that window and whatever. When last we left Devon, we saw her trying to call Harmony. And then that's around that time when Regavi leaves and Mark actually wakes up, whatever. So clearly she has tried to call her a few more times. Now, whether that means she's called him and Mark's actually been awake and aware that she's calling or not, we don't know. We'll find out presumably next week or whatever. Now that we've learned more about Harmony and her connection to the actual procedure of severance, on one hand, maybe she is the right person to be speaking to. It depends just how far gone her feelings towards Lumen are, or where they are right now. Is she opposed to them or not? Based on how she's been treated and her lifetime of how she's been treated, quite frankly, considering she's the one responsible for all this, and has not been acknowledged as such.
Yeah, and I think this is probably perfect timing. At least psychologically in this moment, she's come to the place where she was helpless to help her mother and wasn't there when she died. and now she's given an opportunity to go help or save someone. And so at least on that end. And we also get the insertion of the first song on this podcast performed by an act that I saw on the tour for the album this song is on, and that's the Cult's Firewoman. And I saw them open for Metallica and saw them play Firewoman, and I was excited to see that. And that's from 1989. Not that it matters, but just for context, great song to end on.
When the song came on, I started to chuckle because it's a song I know very, very well,
Right?
And I went, "Ooh, it's another time this season where like." It's so absurdly on the nose. It made me laugh. So it's almost deliberately done that way. And the fact that it's a song that's not just Firewoman and what that song entails, and the fact the name of the band was actually The Cult,
Right.
which, it's like, there's so many ways. It's like a reference on top of a reference at the same time. Just
right. And what is ether? Extremely flammable.
right.
So that's the end of our episode.
Okay. Now that we've finished talking about the content of the episode, I think now we can address issues or what we felt about it. I mean, if you want to take the lead here, and then I'll follow up because, you're more, I don't know if you'll be sweet and I'll be the vitriol on this one. We'll see.
No, I'm going to say that what this episode was to me was, after a band releases a great album, sometimes they come out with an EP, and that EP is good and has some good songs on it. But it's just not an album. And this was sort of an EP of an episode. It ran at 37 minutes, and I feel like we could have had more flesh on the bone. Like with that short an episode, we could have put more about Mark and Devin, or hell, just, throw in a scene of Irving, or throw in a scene. We could have thrown in a scene with Dylan and his wife, or Milchick. We haven't seen Milchick in a while. Throw in a scene with Milchick. Throw in a scene with Mrs. Wong, because obviously there's a connection there with Mrs. Wong.
Right.
So we don't have those. We don't have those extra scenes we could have had, and we're so close to the end to have such a short episode. It feels like wasted space you could have used. Like you left a lot of space left on the cassette. You could have put more music.
Right.
And they didn't. Now, what I'm going to withhold judgment on is, we don't know what episode 9 and 10 are. And we don't know what the context of this episode being here and standing alone and what that meant was. So I'm going to reserve judgment. But this was like a really good EP, but not a great album. And so that's how I view it. And I do want to say, for people that want to criticize what it looked like or the shots, it may not have been directed by Jessica Lagagne, who did the Gemma episode last week, but it's still shot by her. And in this landscape, there's some pretty good photography here. There's some pretty good shots. She captures and sets the scene. And I think what the story wanted, they got out of it. I just don't know if we got a novella and we didn't get a novel. And I think we're all disappointed by that.
I had mentioned a few times early in the podcast what this reminded me of. And now, having spoken about the entire episode, I haven't really changed my mind about it to a certain degree. Now, many of the people who are listening to this podcast probably also listened to us talk about season 3 of The Bear last summer. And season 3 of The Bear was at least a mildly polarizing season, especially in comparison to the previous one, which was considered one of like the seasons of television to be beheld. And there was one specific episode which may have very well been possibly the most, or one of the two most polarizing episodes of the season. I know my opinions of it differed, perhaps even greatly, from two of my co-hosts on this podcast. And that was the one that dealt with the birth of a child and the relationship between a mother and her daughter leading into that. Um, and here's what I would say about that episode in retrospect. And you'll notice that I can use the exact same words about this episode. Number one, because we're both I'm not saying it's a bad episode. It's well put together. It's well acted. It's well directed. That was never my issue with that episode, the bear episode. My issue with the bear episode, more so than anything else, is it was late in the season, of a season where you're only getting a certain number of episodes. The days of the 22 to 24 episode seasons of television are long gone, especially since most of the things we watch are streaming. So it's nice when you get something that's more than 10, but usually it's in that 8 to 10 zone, right? And that episode wasn't a super long episode. Not that episodes of The Bear generally are very long for that matter. But my problem, and I said it on the podcast, I think I said it more than once on the podcast. I think I said it during the specific Bear podcast. I think I might have even brought it up again in the Best of 2024 podcast, if I'm not mistaken. My problem was I kind of wish they just decided to balance the episode and not be it, we're only going to follow this one track. That you come up with something else, a different storyline, something that you can even come up with some sort of parallel. So that way, if you're cutting back and forth, there's a thematic storytelling device that works, which they did sort of with both sides of the Gemma past and future or present story last time, and they've done any number of times with other stories, and that's what they should have done. I felt in that Bear episode, and that's what I felt they should have done in this episode. Because when, like as you pointed out, once you cut out the credits and the little behind the scenes thing, there's about 37 minutes and change worth of actual material here, which means we're dealing with an episode which is at least 10 to 15 minutes shorter than most of the episodes that we've become accustomed to watching. 10 to 15 minutes is an entire storyline you could have put into this episode. And honestly, you trim a minute or two out of some of the driving along sequences in this episode, then you could have had a fully fledged, storyline A and storyline B here. And I think you wouldn't have quite the vitriol that you have gotten from some of the viewers, or many of the viewers of the series. Because we just spent all the time with one character, someone we haven't spent much time with for several weeks, and maybe we had wondered what happened to her, but it didn't mean we necessarily wanted to spend an entire episode with her. Because some of the point of this episode was, let's try to humanize a monster. Let's make them understandable. And whether it worked or not, well, that's up to y'all to determine. It's nice to understand from whence she came. I don't know if I necessarily needed an entire episode to do that, especially when you're dealing with a character that now we were 8 episodes into this season. That's on top of the 9 episodes from last season. So that's 17 episodes to get to this point. Again, I think the information we get is vital to the show. So it's an important episode just in that regard alone. The reveal of what Harmony Cobell actually has done and means is super important. And I have no issues with how the episode was put together and the look of it and the performances of it and so on. But I feel like this could have been part of another episode, an overall episode. And I don't know if it should have that she should have been the sole focus of it. I kind of wish you know what I would have liked them to have done? We brought it up before, because we're seeing this is someone, and we're learning of her past and her childhood and what she went through. This might have been the opportunity to counter that with stuff with Miss Huang and then I guess Mr. Milchick as well. Because that would have been, this is the future version of her. This is the past, and come back and forth. And then we could have learned more about Miss Huang as well, if they chose to give us that information. Again, I'm not saying that necessarily rescues the episode overall in many people's eyes, but it might have given you something more, to use your phrase, something more for us to chew on. You know,
Right.
that's what Lumen used to do. What's Lumen doing now? Have they
Right.
learned from their mistakes, or do they even regard them as mistakes at all?
Right. And to put a bow before we go to Paradise, a couple of random facts I wanted to throw out for the listeners. This caused me to go down a rabbit hole about ether. Um, and Newton proposed luminiferous ether was the substance which he believed light traveled through. Now, what does that begin with? The term lumen. And there's all of these weird things around the term ether. That ultimately was disproved by Albert Einstein and debunked definitively in his 1905 special theory of relativity. Kind of a big deal. Set the theory of quantum physics on its head and is still revered today. Ether is typically referred to as diethyl ether. If you take the first three letters of that and the last two, or the first four and the last two, it spells Dieter. The typical way to determine the presence of peroxides in ether is to use potassium iodine. That is symboled as Ki. And if you look this up, you'll see it. And what is Ki and the end of ether, Er, Kier? You can come up with the beginning and the end of those two to come up with Dieter and Kier. Thought that was interesting in my research on ether. Finally, in this, we see another reference to We Must Cut to Heal. That was in the painting in the lobby on the severed floor at the beginning of this season, was in a cross stitch in the apartment of Miss Cobell in her home, and now is again in the home here. I thought that was interesting, and I'll finally leave with, I think this episode's important for one thing. Harmony has this ability to know everything about the chip. If we look at the end of season one ends with the overtime contingency. We are introduced this season to the Glasgow block. Okay. I was talking this over with my son. I think what this episode points to is at the end of this season, instead of all the innies being on the out, all the outies are going to be on the in. And the Glasgow block's going to be used to try to get to Gemma, and maybe they're going to make it down the elevator to the testing floor. So those are my random thoughts for the end. And now we can move on to Paradise. Sorry, Scott.
I don't know what you think. Sorry, shut the fuck up. All right, so let's talk about Paradise. We've talked about it a few times on this podcast. We certainly talked about it a little bit towards the end of last week because the previous episode was one of the memorable hours of television that we've seen in quite some time, and undoubtedly will be among our, if we do a top 10 best TV episodes at the end of this year, it's going to definitely be one of them. However, I seriously doubt this week's season finale of Paradise will be on the same list. Again, much like the episode of Severance we just talked about, that is not to say it's a bad episode of television. However, I feel it is an episode that perhaps more so than Severance this week, one can take serious issue with the actual content of the episode and the actual reveals of the episode. The first massive chunk of the episode is devoted to solving the mystery of who actually murdered the president, Cal. I personally do not feel I can say that I think that it was handled in a satisfying or even a satisfactory way. I understand there may be some who may attempt to say something like, oh no, the seeds were planted before this episode. I'm going to tell you right now, if you think that, then you are believing in what I call a cop-out. I don't believe that's true. Brian, I don't know. We haven't talked about it. I don't know how you felt about it. But the way they crammed everything into those first 20 minutes of this episode, I had a serious problem with it.
My thoughts were that this is Dan Fogelman's wheelhouse. This is the construction of many episodes of This Is Us, the beginning of this episode. And it seemed like something too much of that world and not enough of this new world he's created. And I did not find it fitting into this world as well as it should have. I don't have a problem with the story that was told. It just didn't seem right in this world. That those beats, whatever, were fine, but to set that up as like, here's the reason for this is the person that did all this. It sort of lets this world that we've created off the hook for its good and bad, and says like maybe this would have carried on and been perfect, but for this outsider. And I also have problems with, as we carry through, that it seems like towards the end of this, knowing they have a future season, they make choices that don't really have consequences. I mean, they made it clear that Sinatra is going to live, even though she's shot and should have been killed, which is more soap opera and not the way this story has been told. So yeah, this was kind of a bummer for me. And I don't know if season two, leaving this world and going outside, or what they do. I don't know that it can be the quality it was after this has happened. I think this has shattered something that now I still think it's going to be in my top 10 at the end of the year. It's been a great run, but man, I just, the beginning of this episode and the way it ended up, I didn't like it. I didn't think it was great. It was good, but it wasn't great. And maybe we're unfair, and forgive us, but sometimes when you're really good at something, people hold you to that standard. And when you just do something good or average, it's maybe a bigger disappointment than you're used to, because we're used to pretty excellent stuff from this show. We're used to really excellent stuff from Severance. And I think this episode of Paradise was not up to the standard of the other episodes this season.
And I was kind of nice about Severance because I felt the problem with the Severance episode was it was just, I got some stuff out of it. I felt overall it was lacking. It almost went along with your analogy about an EP compared to an album,
Right.
where you just didn't give me enough. Now with Paradise, my issues, it's not just one, but let me do them one by one here off the top of my head, because I don't have a damn note written about this. Okay, first of all, whether you were telling the story in present day or flashback, so much of the season beyond understanding this world and reveals about this character or that character was at the core of the show was the mystery of who killed the president. That was what everything was spinning around more than anything else. More than anything else. And you choose to, other than someone who was this basically a glorified extra in a couple other episodes that we see, have a line here or a line there and nothing else. And nothing else. And you choose to go in this episode and relate this whole little story. And I get what you're saying, how it's reminiscent of things that did on This Is Us. I don't even want to bring that show into it. I like that you brought that up because it is reminiscent of that. But I'm talking in terms of storytelling when your show or your season is based around a fucking mystery. And then you do this. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry that I'm cursing so much, but I don't fucking care. That's kind of bullshit. It's kind of bullshit. And then you do this whole thing. And when there was a certain point where I realized where they were going with it. And I was like, oh, okay, he's going to turn. I'm looking at him and then I realized, oh, he's going to be, he's going to be the fucking librarian. Really? Okay. So what? Who cares? To me, that all it did was, okay, so this mystery was never something we were ever have been intended to even remotely figure out. It's kind of like the mystery version of a Deus Ex Machina kind of a thing. It was like, oh, you're just going to plop this in here and here's the explanation for it. Okay, thanks. And they're like, oh, and you don't even choose to play up the tragedy that the guy that you ended up murdering actually was probably on your side and was gonna prove all this stuff was bullshit to begin with. you don't even choose to hit that note that he ultimately made a fucking mistake. That wasn't the person he should have been. If he's going to be killing someone, it should have been someone like a Sinatra, quite frankly, not the guy who was already geared to fucking expose all this. I understand him not knowing that, but the fact they didn't even touch on that, the further tragedy of what he did, kind of like bothered me as well. Like, oh, you're kind of missing an opportunity here. You're missing giving him the opportunity to be like, what have I done? Kind of thing. You blew that. So everything regarding the actual resolution of that mystery, I did not appreciate whatsoever. I just didn't care for it. Going back to what you had said about, okay, then you have the unfolding of, okay, we've got another season, so we're going to roll out all these other things that we're going to plant the seeds for the following season. Whether it be, oh, now the guy who is VP and now he's the president, he's finally going to be, take charge of, the room of billionaires because somehow, what's her face is such a master shot. She shot her just in the right spot part of her fucking chest that, oh, it won't kill her. She's just going to be incapacitated like forever, which I'm like, really? We're straining credibility here just a little bit, but okay, whatever. The Sinatra thing I thought was interesting because that's what I was referencing earlier, because Sinatra was someone that we got in a very short period of time. We got her backstory. Oh, we understand where she came from, what she was, and it does explain to at least to a certain degree why she's become what she is. But ultimately, she's a fucking monster, as she admits herself at the end of the previous episode. And it's a great little scene where they're saying that. Severance does not pull that off quite as well with the Harmony Cobell character, where we get the whole past about her. It's like, oh, that kind of makes sense why she might be the way she is and what she's done and how she's been wronged and whatever. But at this point, maybe we've gone too far with that character to be able to forgive her. And I wonder with Severance, well, they've got 2 more episodes to go, and now she has answered the phone. If she indeed does genuinely help Mark and Devin, does that put her on the road to redemption as far as that character is concerned? Or does she not go that way? That's a show that we can never predict where they're going to go. So I almost don't want to think she's going to help, because that kind of means she's going to screw them over. But back to Paradise, by the time we get to the end, I was just like, okay, so he's going to somehow, I like that they established the whole thing with him being able to fly early on. So that worked or whatever. Although I wonder who's going to close the doors to the mountain hangar once he gets out of there or whatever. But by the time it was over, I was like, ugh. It's never a good sign when in my opinion, the worst episode of the season is also the last episode. And we've run into that with a few shows over the years.
We have, but I mean, I'm to make your point, I'll ask you a question, and I bet I know the answer. What's the name of the guy who killed the president? Do you know? I don't. That's a problem.
Oh, it's a big problem.
That's a problem with your show. Like, if at the end of it, if it's been a mystery about who killed the president at the end of the last episode, you don't remember, or it wasn't important enough to remember, like, that's a failure.
By the way, you saying that reminds me of how I piss off so many big TV fans. See how long it takes you before you know where I'm going. Where when you have a series that's built so much around the mystery of who the murderer is, and by the time it's resolved in the final episode, and and I will say to someone, whether it be a day later or now years later, especially when they hold up that series, or specifically that season of that series, as one of the great seasons of television ever made, built on these great performances and I was like, oh. But that whole show is about, ultimately, beyond the 2 main characters, it was about the mystery, right? Because the whole show is built around mystery. I mean, it's kind of factors into the fucking title of the show, sort of, kind of, doesn't it? Like, yeah, of course it does. Of course it. Right. Hey, what's the name of the person? What's the name of the killer in that show? Tell me the name. Tell me the name.
Exactly.
They never tell me the name. It's like, you don't know.
Talk about those detectives that are not false.
Yes. And now they're in commercials all the time
Yeah. Yeah,
for Salesforce. What the fuck?
exactly.
Oh, Jenna, I don't know if you listen to our podcast anymore, but I'm talking about your favorite season of True Detective. That's right. Oh, someone it's like, name me the killer. No, yeah, you don't know. Shut up. Stop.
Killer is the Yellow
The
King.
Yellow King, the Yellow King is like, Yellow King, that was in Legion. Shut up. No, shut up. Anyway, it was just kind of a weird week to have like both these shows that have been like so good week after week. And for me personally, they both rolled out kind of disappointing episodes. I mean, obviously with Paradise, it's more unfortunate because it's the final episode. Hey, I'm not saying it's a bad episode. If you liked it, that's great. I know friends of mine liked the episode. I didn't hate it. I was just really disappointed by it. And especially when it followed such a really great episode that kind of made the disappointment sting a bit more because I kept thinking, you can do better than this. Now, I can flip it around on myself and say, hey, you've only been introduced and spent time with X number of characters. And if it's not one of them, doesn't that ultimately mean you're going to be disappointed by whoever it is? And I was like, you know what? That's a solid point. That's true. Here's two ways you resolve that. You would have done one of two things. The storyline we got at the beginning of this episode, right? You piecemeal that over the course of a number of previous episodes.
You know, when you do it, I was thinking of this earlier when you said it. The episode back when Xavier you see that he's involved in helping save the president from a shooting. That episode, put the backstory there. Start with that guy there. And then leave a mystery as to why we did his backstory, but he's not been in it a little while. And then tell a little bit of a backstory with the waitress, that he ultimately ends up, co-opting to go into the mountain with him. Lay the pieces so it doesn't look like it's 3 a.m. and your project's due at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
and you slapped it all together and you hand the paper in and the paper's still warm.
And you can certainly do it in a way where you're not giving away the farm because you might not necessarily be revealing that, oh, that guy's going to turn out to be the librarian that quickly. You don't blow that, whatever, but you could have done everything leading right the fuck up to that. Then I'm kind of okay with it. By the way, you also at the same time, you got to give us just a little bit more with the librarian then.
Well, I mean, there are a couple opportunities when the son's sitting there in the library. He could have walked up and had a little conversation with him that seemed weird, and then he just walks off.
Yeah. There's so many ways you could have done that, or else you don't resolve the mystery this season.
Right.
That's all. Then you just don't fucking resolve it. You have part of that story here and not the rest of it, but we don't resolve the mystery of who the murderer is, and then you just put it because there was no guarantee. I didn't get a guarantee we were going to get a resolution to the mystery this year in these 8 episodes. It wasn't like, I started the season with who shot JR, and it's like, well, it's been 2 episodes. Why haven't you told me yet? I don't know if you're going to, or who killed Laura Palmer. We not find out who killed Laura Palmer until the following season anyway. If I don't remember, it's been a while. I can't remember. And that was a lot more episodes too. That much I do remember. I just found it very disappointing. The show will still be rank high on my list at the end of the year because I didn't think it was egregiously bad. I just was kind of let down by it, But that can happen. I mean, look, first season, the one I always go to is the OA. Is that how it's pronounced? I never know how to pronounce it. Love the first, whatever. Was it a 10-episode season? I can't remember now. I think I loved the first 9 episodes and I hated the 10th episode. And this, I won't say I hated it. I was just like, ugh. And it was just, and I guess it followed the best episode of the series with this one. Like with Severance, There are some who probably think the Gemma episode was the best episode of that series. I'm not one of those people, but I get why some people feel that way. And then you followed it with this one.
But even if you don't think it's the best, it was a striking episode.
Right, absolutely.
That's pretty much it. And so that means my plug, if you're not watching The Pit, watch The Pit, the best episode of the 3 shows that I love right now. The best of those 3 episodes this week was on The Pit.
There you go. Excellent. You know what? I just realized I had a whole lot of notes about Paradise and I ignored all of them. So I've just looked at like, too late now. Okay. We will be back next week for what should be the penultimate episode of Severance's 2nd season, The After Hours. By the way, it hit me when I saw the title. Hey, Patricia Arquette's sister, Rosanna Arquette. She starred in the kind of culty classic Scorsese film, After Hours. And I gotta be honest, for about 5 minutes, I could have sworn Rosanna Arquette had passed away, but then I looked her up and was like, oh no, I was wrong. I was like, why did I think Rosanna Arquette had passed away? That makes no sense. I'll never know. Anyhow, so you've got that to look forward to. Also, we just released the latest Twilight Zone podcast. This one was me and Brian here. We were talking about 2 more Twilight Zone episodes, the 5th and 6th ones from the 1st season of Twilight Zone. I cannot stress enough how on point we've been able to keep that podcast and how it is worth checking out. Even better if you go to Paramount Plus or Amazon Prime or wherever and watch the first bunch of Twilight Zone episodes, because we've now covered the first 6 episodes in these 3 Twilight Zone podcasts so far. And I'll be doing another one with Joe in a couple weeks, I believe. But seriously, it's pretty good.
It's great.
Anyway, you can check us out on our Facebook page, on X Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Instagram. Just look for the Serious TV Drama Podcast, and you're likely to find us in all of those places, as well as most podcasting platforms. Also, you can email us comments, theories, feedbacks, and so-ons. Suddenly, I'm in Letterkenny. The email address is stvdpodcast.gmail.
At gmail.com.
Why the fuck did I write a dot? Oh, I'm such a fucking moron. Yes, stvdpodcast at gmail.com. Whatever. It's time to go. Thanks for joining me once again, Brian H.
I'm happy to be here, and Scott will get that reintegration sorted out for you.
Oh, God, do I need it tonight? They don't tell you what happens when you pour whiskey on a chip. So we'll see you guys again on the severed floor, but right now we got to get back upstairs. See ya.
See ya.
Thank you.